starting off first with our top focus. There were little signs of peace in Pakistan's capital today as protests continue to paralyze the city of Islamabad. With arson and stone pelting, protesters renewed violence even as authorities launched an operation to clear the key road of Faizabad in the area. Here's a report on what happened.
Pakistan's Faizabad interchange has become a tense junction as protesters have staged a sit-in for more than 2 weeks now. At least 2 people are dead and more than 250 others injured in the street demonstrations. The area settled into an uneasy standoff as protesters, defiant of the government, set ablaze a car and 3 motorcycles while clashing with Pakistani security forces for a second day outside the capital of Islamabad. Protesters are demanding the resignation of the country's law minister for what they consider blasphemy after parliamentary bills were amended. These activists from the Tehreek-e-Labbaik party are saying that the amendments weaken the Islamic tenet of Muhammad as God's final prophet. On the other side are the paramilitary rangers who closed in on the Faizabad road on Saturday but have not yet launched an operation as they await a nod from the government. Pakistan's army chief has called on the country's prime minister to handle the protests peacefully.
I'm currently standing on the road that leads to the protesters. Behind me, as you can see, the road has been cordoned off and traffic is not being allowed. Only a few people can go if they have a house on this particular road. Otherwise, the police are not allowing any traffic. Just around about a kilometer from here is where the protesters are. They have managed to come back again. Yesterday, there was a police operation against them that lasted for over 7 to 8 hours, but the police was unsuccessful in clearing the protesters out. Now the police is not engaging with them. The Pakistani government has called in the army, but we're getting reports that the army has expressed reservations of not engaging with the protesters and only restricting their role to protecting sensitive installations in the country.
Even though signs of peace appear hazy, some restoration is coming in from the Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, which has lifted the ban on the broadcast of news channels. This came a day after it had ordered a media blackout by ordering cable operators to take all news channels off air. The ban on social media, however, is still in force. Facebook, Twitter and Instagram are not accessible in Pakistan, while YouTube can only be accessed via the mobile application. Bureau Report, WION.
So here's a look at why Pakistan is witnessing so much anger on the streets of its national capital and other areas. Here's a quick explainer of what's really happening.
Widespread protests are taking place in Islamabad, Faisalabad, Lahore, Karachi and Gujranwala. The protesting Islamists from the hardline Tehreek-e-Labbaik party want the law minister of Pakistan to be sacked for omitting a reference to the Prophet Muhammad in a new version of the electoral oath. Law Minister Zahid Hamid has already apologized over the issue, claiming it was a clerical error. But protesters aren't relenting. They accuse the minister of blasphemy. As the situation remains tense in the capital, the army has been deployed along with 8,000 security officials to disperse the protesters and firefight that fury on the streets. Shortly after the situation got out of control, access to social media sites like Facebook and Twitter was also cut across the country to prevent rumor mongering. This in addition to an official diktat by Pakistani government to news channels to desist from showing the live coverage of violence. Pakistan's blasphemy law makes insulting Islam a crime punishable by death. Critics say that these laws have been used to persecute minority faiths and unfairly target minorities.
Let's broaden this up. We will also take a closer look in just a short bit at who exactly these protesters are. But before we get into that, let's get in a quick perspective from Sushant Sareen, who's joining us on the broadcast, senior fellow Vivekananda International Foundation. Sushant, what do you make of what's happening? Do you see this as a failed crackdown on part of the Pakistani government? Why I ask you that is that according to reports, despite orders that were, of course, sent in 3 weeks late from the civilian government to the army to help restore law and order, no troops were seen at the scene as late as today afternoon, something that our correspondents on ground have also been confirming. What do you really sense is happening? Is there a hesitation on part of the army? Is there a hesitation on part of the government because they fear that the country is inching closer towards a coup?
I don't know whether it's inching closer towards a coup, because the military, for all practical purposes, is pretty much controlling everything. And, the kind of messaging which came from the military after the government started the crackdown with, a Major General level officer issuing a statement on behalf of the army chief, literally instructing the civilian government on what it should or should not do, tells you the state of civil-military relations and who's the boss in that country. I think as far as the army is concerned, they are giving a long enough rope to the civilian government to hang itself, and they are making sure that it is the civilian government's call and the civilian government's fall. And the army is watching from the sidelines, really, is not interfering, or not interfering would be the wrong word, but it's not, following the orders to try and clear up this crowd. The civilian government has clearly failed. It's a self-inflicted wound because they should have cracked down right on day one. But members of the civilian government themselves have been instigating, this mob, whether it is Shahbaz Sharif, who's the Chief Minister of Punjab, under whose watch these people were able to congregate where they've congregated, or the son-in-law of Nawaz Sharif, who seems to be on the same page as many of these fanatics. He's a crazy guy himself. So I don't know how they're going to be able to reconcile these positions. So in a sense, as far as the civilian government is concerned, it's partly hunting with the hare, hunting with the hound, and running with the hare. Now, when you have this kind of a political system and this kind of political decision making, then obviously, things will spiral out of control. And frankly, had the protest been handled carefully and in advance, about 15 days back, there were just a handful of people. Today, it's snowballed into a nationwide agitation. So clearly, it seems that all is not well. And that there are wheels within wheels on the decision making on how the civilian side, the military, the opposition, how everybody is, calculating their own gains from what will come out of this particular agitation.
Right.
And it's one holy mess.
Stay with me, Sushant. Let me also bring in Stephen Golub, international affairs expert, who's joining us on the broadcast. What do you make of the situation, given that Islamist protests are a tried and tested way to bring about change in government in Pakistan? Do you see Pakistan's crackdown on the religious protesters at the same time as a triumph for the military?
Well, for one thing, I think for all of us, be it in India or in Pakistan, it does illustrate the complexity of the situation. There are so many contending forces, or sometimes potentially contending forces operating in terms of, be it the military, the ISI, the civilian government, civil society, be it positive forces or in this case very negative forces operating. It does reinforce the authority of the military, but I think we still face the problem that the military is a problem itself in terms of its attitudes towards terrorism there.
Why is it that, according to you, Sushant, the government has been dragging its feet on controlling the situation? Let's face it, they've been laying siege for the last 3 weeks. It's only now that the government wakes up and feels the need to bring in the army. Over 200 people and counting have been injured.
Is that over the last 3 or 4 decades, in which, a particularistic kind of brand of Islam or Islamic fundamentalism has been supported and spawned by the state, it's become a monster which nobody is willing to really, try and ensnare. So the problem is that the government at one level feels that heading into elections next year, if they were to crack down really hard, they could lose a substantial part of their support base. The second problem for the government is that they have the example of the Lal Masjid crisis, which happened almost a decade back. When the military moved in, there was an action out there, about 100 people died, and the Taliban, insurgency in Pakistan got a fillip, and the next 10 years, it's taken them quite some doing to quell that. From the army's point of view, again, one is the Lal Masjid syndrome. The second is that the army chief, there were insinuations that he himself was an Ahmadiyya, which means that, the community against which this entire agitation is in a manner of speaking directed. So there was this insinuation against him. He probably is taking this back seat because he doesn't want to be accused of either being related to Ahmadis, which there are reasons to believe that part of his family is Ahmadi, or Ahmadi himself. So I think he's taking this hands-off kind of an approach. He doesn't want to become more controversial than what he already is. So as a result, he's letting things be. And then finally, there is this whole question of, as you go into elections,
right.
You have a media which is playing an extremely irresponsible role, which is also what happened during the Lal Masjid crisis, that while the crisis was happening, the media was exhorting the government to crack down and restore the writ of the state. The moment the government starts cracking down, you have these troublemakers in the media, most of them very big names, who then start, this entire campaign of what grave injustice has been committed and actually create hatred for the government and for the state. So when you have this kind of an irresponsible attitude, whether it be of opposition leaders like Imran Khan, who has actually shown that he is
right.
Taliban Khan, or the media people who are also almost Taliban spokesmen, then you have the kind of stuff which you are seeing right now, that complete paralysis in governance.
I also want to get in Ahmed Shaheen, Head of Special Investigations and Advisor, GU News Pakistan, onto the conversation. Sir, is there not a pattern here of social unrest and instability every time the military has taken over in the history of Pakistan? Why I ask you that is also because the infamous coup-starting 111th Brigade of Pakistan Army is soon expected to take over the streets. We'll just try and reconnect with Ahmed Shaheen, but the point that I was just mentioning, I also want to take that across to both Sushant and Stephen Golu. But before I get into that, here's the reason why we're asking this question here at WION. Islamabad is under a siege from a religious group violently protesting the weakening of an anti-blasphemy law, and Pakistan's civilian government has called upon the country's army chief, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, to help control the situation that has spiraled out of civilian control. To Pakistan watchers, that should come as a familiar sign. Whenever civilian governments have failed in the past 7 decades since the creation of the Islamic country, Pakistan's army generals have stepped in. Pakistan's last elected Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is battling corruption charges and was disqualified from the office. The current Prime Minister, Shahid Khaqan Abbasi, was kicked upstairs then to take over the role only 3 months ago. And yet again, it will be Pakistan's 111th Brigade, like I just mentioned, one that has always been used in military takeovers, that will be called to restore law and order. Will it do so and go back to its barracks is the immediate question that arises, or will it take over altogether? Let's now take a look at Pakistan's long history under military rule, under which observers say the country has enjoyed the maximum stability. The situation on the ground was perfect for a military takeover. There was widespread dissatisfaction over Pakistan's 1956 constitution. Pakistan saw a flurry of prime ministers, 4 of them in 2 years. The president himself, an army general, declared martial law and appointed General Ayub Khan as his prime minister. The latter usurped all powers and ruled for 11 years, forcing the president to resign. Turmoil again over the results of elections in East and West Pakistan. General Yahya Khan takes over, delays sharing power with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in Dhaka. Freedom movement swells and Bangladesh is born. This general ruled only for 2 years before he handed over power to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and remained under house arrest himself. Another election, more turmoil, convincing Pakistan's army yet again that martial law is the only answer. General Zia-ul-Haq takes over, arrests and tries and executes Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. The general is the longest-serving head of state in Pakistan so far. His brand of martial law was considered strict but modern. General Zia also encouraged religious fundamentalism. Pakistan enjoyed a stable GDP and the maximum economic prosperity under this general. Barely 11 years after General Zia's era, tensions surfaced between Pakistan's civilian government under Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and his army chief Pervez Musharraf. In a dramatic turn, even as General Musharraf's plane is preparing to land in Pakistan, his army loyalists arrest the PM and declare martial law. Musharraf declares himself president in 2001, wins himself another 5 years in office through a controversial referendum in 2002. Pakistan's economy improves under his rule, and so do liberal social values. But he flees abroad to escape charges of impeachment and treason and remains overseas, announcing his return to Pakistan politics every now and then. Emir Shaheen, who is the head of special investigations and advisor Geo News Pakistan, is joining us on the broadcast. Good evening, sir. I ask you why the infamous coup starting 111th Brigade is soon going to be taken over the streets of Pakistan.
The 111 Brigade, as we call it, has been responsible for many political governments being sent home, attacks on political parties and all of that. It is an active force, and it's been called upon. I'm not sure if it's going to do the job that it's supposed to do when it comes to these protesters.
So what do you mean? Because there is a widespread apprehension that this brigade will not perhaps return to the barracks. There is the other possibility of it taking over altogether.
When you talk about military coup, I mean, in Pakistan, the symptoms for military coup are never the same. So you can't really say, I mean, every day looks like there could be a military coup, or, you know, they don't give symptoms. There's no particular reason why they would do it. There are no set ground rules for that because it's illegal. So the 111 Brigade has been called, like they've been asked to advise on how many troops would be needed to do it. But at the bottom of all of this is, first it was the military saying, yes, we're behind you, to the government. They were saying, we're behind you. If you want to do an operation, we would do it. And as soon as the operation starts, the military says, maybe you should try some peaceful talks first, which had been going on for the last 20 days. So it's kind of a backstabbing to the political government right now. The political system, the Prime Minister was, you know, the same courts have already sent the Prime Minister packing. So the same courts are putting pressure on the political government to do something. The political government knows the current scenario of Pakistan. If they do something, that could be a fatal mistake. So the political government is stuck between a rock and a hard place right now.
How serious is the concern that the number of protesters might swell up? Just to reiterate the point that Cleric Khadim Hussain Rizvi Libek is one of the two new ultra-religious political movements. Libek campaigns on defending Pakistan's strict blasphemy laws, which of course has been the trigger point for this chaos. Won a surprisingly strong 6% and 7.6% of the vote in the two recent by-elections. How strong is their support base on the ground?
Yes, they were a major, I mean, to the surprise of many who are sometimes pessimistic about these people, it was a big surprise to us as well that in the last NA 120 elections, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik secured, I think, the third largest. It was, and thousands of votes. I'm in Lahore right now, and these protests have become micromanaged by other religiously minded people. And I mean, I have been attacked today by these protesters too, and so have many of the other people who have communicated with me. The social media is banned, televisions are off air, so these are no ordinary days.
Stephen Golub, do you see this as a failed crackdown, given the fact that the government has been dragging its feet to control the situation, has only woken up now after 3 weeks or protests after 200 people have been left injured. Do you not feel that there has been this widespread apprehension on part of the government as well to call in the army? Given the history of the government, given the history of military takeover, there is a strong possibility still that the 111 Brigade will take over altogether.
Well, I certainly would defer to your other two guests on their expertise regarding these matters. Having said that, I think, yes, the government has responded in a kind of very cautious and inconsistent manner. The other element I'd add to the analysis of this whole situation is the extent to which the military, as has, I believe, been suggested by at least one of the other guests, may be profiting or manipulating this situation to some extent. I'm not saying the Pakistani military would be behind these protests to begin with, but as a way of emphasizing its importance, its authority, it be the ultimate guarantor of stability and security in Pakistan. It's possible that it is taking advantage of the indecision or insecurity of the civilian government to its own, that is, the Pakistani military's benefit.
Sushant Sareen, the army's rapidly amassing power shows that democracy in Pakistan is imperiled once again.
Well, I don't think it was ever not imperiled. But as far as mounting a coup is concerned, I don't think the army needs even the 111 Brigade. I think the most immortal comments of a former Prime Minister of Pakistan was that to mount a coup in Pakistan, all you need is one jeep and two trucks. So you don't even need the whole brigade to mount the coup. And that is the ultimate reality of Pakistan. Now, having said that, the point is that this current agitation, and the gentleman from Pakistan was quite correct, this current agitation is something that actually the power of these guys, these fellows are not, the current agitators are not known for jihadist activity or militancy. Of course, they are no less fanatics than the guys who blow themselves up. They're just as bad as them. But the point is that these are people who have actually proven their prowess even at the ballot box. Now, it was not just the Lahore election, it was also the Peshawar election where they put up a surprisingly strong showing. So the question is that while these people have the street power, and Islamist groups in Pakistan have had street power even when they've not had any ballot power, these are guys who seem to be having both street power as well as ballot power. So that means a tectonic shift has taken place, or is probably in the process of taking place in Pakistani politics. I think the funeral of that assassin of the Punjab governor, when a couple of 100,000 people turned up for that funeral, should have actually worked as a wake-up call for the government and for the people who watch these trends very carefully. Right. Clearly, that was missed. And now this whole thing has snowballed into a point where I think all sorts of Byzantine intrigues are also underway. You can never rule them out in a place like Pakistan.
Sushant, just hold that thought there. I also want to take that across to Ahmad Shaheen. First, what are the next 24 hours looking like? And I also know that you were urging to come in on an earlier point.
Yeah, the next 24 hours, I mean, for the next 2 days, there will be no schools opening. Social media is down. Television channels, I've just heard, are going to start opening now. I think, as a journalist, it's sad that television channels had to be shut down, but then channels would have instigated a lot more violence, not by saying you should go out and burn, but by just coordinating, working as a coordinating information basis for all the people who not necessarily believe in Tehreek-e-Labbaik, the political party formed after Mumtaz Qadri, the murderer of Salman Taseer, was hanged. But people generally, anybody who has a little bit of a fanatical Islamist idea was coming down out on the street. They didn't even know what it was about. Most people I've spoken to on the streets do not know what this is about. All they know is that we should respect the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and they're coming out to show solidarity and bravery. They're also looting people and breaking and putting cars on fire.
Ahmad Shaheen, just hold that thought. I also want to get a quick update from our Pakistan Bureau Chief, Taha Siddiqui, who has been tracking the very latest on ground, has been getting us ground reports all throughout. Taha, has the military taken over at least the sensitive Faizabad area? What's it looking like at the spot?
Well, as far as the spot is concerned, which is basically one of the entrances of Islamabad, there is no visible military presence over there. Even yesterday, when the police operation was being carried out, the Pakistan-run military, the Pakistan Army-run Rangers, which is also deputed in Islamabad city, did not take part in the operation. And today also we're not seeing the military there. The military has been limited itself to being deployed only at sensitive installations on one of the main roads, the Constitution Avenue, where the Pakistani Parliament is, the Prime Minister House is, Supreme Court, and other important buildings. And we're also getting reports from different sources on ground. It's not the military itself has officially not confirmed it, but apparently the military has advised the Pakistani government not to use force and negotiate through political settlements. So there is right now the protesters are back on location, and they've actually spread out. Earlier on, they were located and restricted to one area inside, which was a road leading inside Islamabad. Now they've spread out into Pindi, so they're like holding around about 8 to 10 places hostage. And this is not just in Islamabad. Across the country, we're getting reports from Punjab, from Lahore city, from Faisalabad and other parts of Punjab, and then Karachi also, that there are ongoing protests as we speak right now.
Taha, I just want to come back to you. Before that, Ahmad Shaheen, that's the earlier point that we were touching upon. Why is it that despite orders from the civilian government on Saturday night, as Taha just pointed out, still the sensitive besieged area of Faisalabad sees no significant military presence? What's the larger ploy here?
I can analyze it. According to my analysis, the Rangers, which is from the military, but it's usually almost always under a military general or ex-general. The Pakistan Rangers is questioning whether or not the order should be written or verbal, and it's a very simple case of people telling you to go and we'll sort you out, and once you go there to a fight, they back out and let you get beaten up. This is, I think, what's happening right now.
And you were also attacked, you were mentioning?
Yes, Lahore is not at the brunt of the attacks, but the people who I took pictures of them too, and I've tried to find out who these people are. These people had nothing to do with Tehreek-e-Labbaik, but they have very strong extremist religious sentiments. So they just heard about what was happening and they wanted to play their part. So they were just blocking roads and throwing bricks at cars and everything. And I kind of got into trouble because I tried to question them about what they were doing.
Taha, is blasphemy just the trigger point? There have been undertones of this for quite some time now. Would you not agree?
Well, basically, as far as the blasphemy aspect is concerned, that was the initial demand of these protesters.
Yes.
That there's this blasphemy sort of law that was changed, or rather the oath that is the election bill that has had an amendment which amounts to blasphemy. And ever since then, the government has actually reverted and sort of said that they have corrected the mistake and said it was a clerical error. But despite that, now we're seeing that the group has greater designs. It's just not limited to protests pertaining to blasphemy laws or anti-Ahmadi, which is one of the Muslim sects considered non-Muslim by Pakistani law. That issue particularly, it's grown larger. We're seeing now that the protesters are demanding that not just the law minister, which was the earlier demand that he should resign, who they think was behind this amendment in the law, but they're saying that everyone, the whole government should wrap up. So, given the fact that elections are around the corner, but there is a lot of tension between Pakistan military and the ruling party right now, it appears that there are greater powers here at play, and they're the ones who are trying to create this trouble in a way to lead to more chaos, perhaps, and probably dissolution of government.
earlier than expected or earlier than it should happen.
I want to take that across to Stephen Golub. Blasphemy, of course, was the trigger point, but as Taha is suggesting, there have been undertones for this taking shape for the longest time, and it's been in the offing. This, of course, would mean that they will not relent till the cabinet resigns. This is no longer just about the law minister resigning.
Oh, yes, and I think it was an excellent point that there are various forces at play here, not just among the protesters and in terms of their escalating demands, but possibly within the Pakistani military. Even falling short of an actual coup, there are various ways of asserting its authority, undermining the civilian government's authority, hurting the ruling party. So it's a complex mix of forces and interests at play here. Certainly include the protesters and their escalating demands, but are by no means confined to them.
So, Shant, you have been studying what exactly was the trigger point, blasphemy being one. Do you think the protesters might have overreacted?
No, I think they've not overreacted. I think they've reacted to a plan, because blasphemy was never the issue out there.
Right.
There was a minor amendment in the law and it was a technical correction in the existing law, where what was actually a declaration and not an oath. So in a declaration, rather than saying that I swear, they just said I affirm, which is the correct technical thing. Now, on just that one phrase, there is this whole movement which has been created, and even that particular phrase has already been corrected. The government initially tried to stonewall it, but then they realized that this is a time bomb, and they immediately backed down, and the entire parliament agreed to it. So there is absolutely no reason for these fanatics to be on the streets, and yet if they are, then they have partly been encouraged in it by the ruling party itself. Because again, within the ruling party, there is a kind of a tug of war going on. There are various factions, including between the two brothers, and all sorts of other shenanigans are happening. And then, of course, there is the civil military aspect. And then there are people like Taliban Khan or Imran Khan who are waiting on the wings and who are stirring the pot all the time, and who are actually instigating mobs and actually defending the mobs rather than standing with the democratic government.
Right.
So everybody is trying to, grind his own axe in this particular thing. And what has been happening has clearly been not an overreaction, but by design. Now, what that design is all about, whether it is to destabilize the government and usher in fresh elections, or prematurely, have the assembly's dissolution and then have whole elections. I don't think if the government is forced to resign, then I think the game is up. The 10 years of the democratic interregnum in Pakistan is over, and you probably see something else coming in its place.
And like
because constitutionally, I don't see how
in between democracy being imperiled often, but we do see stronger signs of that happening yet again. Could this be Pakistan's inching closer towards a military coup? We will have to wait and watch for that. Stephen Golub, Sushant Sareen, Ahmad Shaheen and Taha Siddiqui, appreciate you joining us on the broadcast with all of those